Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another transmission of Host of Darkness with yours truly, transmitting from the abyss itself. Thank you for tuning in for another episode of the paranormal and the unexplained. It's been said that telling ghost stories is a great family bonding experience. So, if you'd like to submit a story or experience you'd like me to read, please make sure to leave it in the comment section, send me an email, submit a Reddit post on the channel's official Reddit, or on my Instagram, all of which are in the description below. Thankfully, we are getting close to the day where the veil between life and the dead are closest. For on that 31st of October and the 2nd of November, I'll be coming out with new episodes with many stories of brujas, nahuales, ghosts, phantoms, cryptids, and those who have come back, and etc. So, don't forget to tune in on that day. Tonight, we have some rare, mystifying experiences for you, passed down from one generation to another. These are experiences told by family members of events without explanation, and without a doubt, might give you chills. I'm your host, Ivan, and tonight, let's explore some of these stories in the dark. Hello, community. It is hard for me to write this because it is something that to this day impacts me a lot. Well, here it goes. This happened in 2013 during Holy Week. Every Easter week, we stayed in my grandfather's ranch, which is a few minutes from Urres, a town in Sonora, Mexico. I remember that this ranch was large with corrals for cows, pigs, horses, and so much more. My grandfather lived near the pig pen, in a little house with the pigs. You see, he lived in a little blue wooden house, and he barely had any light from a lamp outside his house, where he used to sit on a very old wooden chair that squeaked when he sat on it. Well, on that day, we were outside about 30 meters from his house with my family talking around a bonfire that my uncle and I made. We were talking and it went on till around 12 o'clock at night. And in the mountains, everything gets dark quickly. When we're in the middle of a conversation with my grandfather, telling his horror stories and all that, my nephew felt like going to the bathroom, which was inside at the house at the time. It was dark that night, and he didn't really arrive when he almost reached my grandfather's house. And he started screaming one time, saying, he's sitting. My uncle, my grandfather, and I went running to him. When we arrived at my nephew, there he was. But there was also my grandfather's donkey, sitting in a chair, humming a song. He saw us and started laughing in a voice so distorted, and it still gives me chills to this day when I remember it. After he finished laughing, he ran towards us on two legs. None of us noticed until my uncle said that it had a pig's head on top of its head, and we started to run. We could hear that thing running towards us, laughing. When we arrived with everyone, they saw us looking pale, and we were at a loss for words. We told them that a horse had ran at us and we had already put it in the corral, but to this day, we decided that we would never tell them. And after many years, my grandfather sold the ranch, and we never heard anything about it again. I write this anecdote because I know you will believe me. I'm going to tell you what happened to my aunt here in Culiacan. It turns out that 30 years ago, when my aunt just got married, she bought a house, but that house was next to a cemetery. She never imagined what was going to happen to her there. My aunt had 9 sisters, including my mother, and since the house was big, 2 other aunts lived with her. That house was close to my grandmother's house, so she would almost always have a lot of people, or sometimes she was left alone. One night, she stayed with another aunt. One night, one of the aunts stayed with another aunt. Then, almost at bedtime, she started to hear a lot of footsteps and people walking and talking as if they were at a party downstairs. She didn't get scared, but she thought that everyone had arrived early from the party. When she went downstairs to attend to the people, she realized that no one was there. She was genuinely shocked, but she didn't get scared, so she just went up to bed. Another time at midnight, she heard a knock at the door of the house. She asked my other aunt to go with her because it was late. So, they opened the door, and there was nobody. The street was empty. They got a little scared and went to bed. The next day in the morning, they did not tell anyone because it could have just been a joke or some drunk knocking on the door. It was nothing paranormal, and on the same day, one of my aunts left and left my aunt at the house, the owner of the house, alone. She started to wash the dishes and finished. She started to mop the living room floor when she began to hear that the spoons and forks began to move by themselves. She turned to see the kitchen and all the dishes began to shake. She got scared and went up to her room and stayed there for a while. Later, still no one had come home because they were still probably drunk at a party, and she began to go to the patio to wash clothes. It was one of those big patios with a tree in the back, and right next door was the cemetery. She started to wash by hand the clothes, and suddenly she heard something behind her. In the direction where the tree was, a woman spoke to her and said,
Rosa, turn around. Rosa, turn around. Rosa.
When my aunt heard this, she was petrified with fright, because she knew that there was no one in the house, and it was a spectral voice of sorts, and without turning around, she went to her room to hide. At around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, everyone arrived at the house, and they were surprised to see my aunt upstairs in her room. She tells them everything, and my other relatives, when they hear this, they say that something like this has happened to everyone. Nothing like that, but things would move around without explanation, but no one ever dared to tell her. My aunt lived for months in that house and eventually sold it. A short time later, she found that the owners had torn down the house to build something new, and when they knocked down the tree, they discovered a wooden box full of golden coins. Not enough to get rich, but several, and she believed that the spirits wanted to give her the box, and that is why they talked to her, but she never dared to turn around. When my grandfather was newly wedded, he worked in a very well-known hotel in those days. The hotel was very large. However, the people who came to experience strange encounters there were almost always from the same place in the hotel. The people who stayed in the specific room almost always never lasted more than 2 days, since the receptionist said that many times they would receive calls from annoyed people who claimed that there was a child in their window that always tapped on the glass so that they would go out to play. However, the people who stayed there might not want to remember or want an explanation for that event, since it was on the 5th floor and the rooms didn't have any balconies in that area of the hotel. The cleaning people who worked there didn't want to go through that hallway also, since it was said that the child played in the middle of the hallway and you can hear his voice and laughter. My grandfather witnessed one of these events personally when he went down the hallway and heard the voice of a little boy behind him. But when he turned around, he never saw anyone. From another anecdote from that hotel was not told by my grandfather, but by a friend of his. The gentleman, we'll call him Miguel, was a guard of one of those booths that allow access to employees in the morning shift. One day when he arrived, he met the new guard. She made small talk, according to him. The girl was very talkative. Between that talk came a question that was very strange to Miguel. And the question was, until what time can I allow the entry of the cleaning employees? The girl began to tell him that the night before, an elderly lady arrived, and immediately the girl did not let her in. The lady, when she saw that, showed her credentials to enter. Her name was Maria. And then she let her in, but didn't see her leave. Upon hearing this information, he could not help but get serious and then said, "This can't be possible. Miss Maria passed away 2 days ago." The girl, thinking it was a joke, just laughed uncomfortably. And upon seeing Miguel's expression, she understood everything. She just kept quiet and left. And after that day, she didn't show up for work. It's not my story, it's my uncle's, but there are 3 of them, so let's get on it. Number 1. I was in the living room of my house and noticed there was a living room set. And to enter the kitchen, you needed to pass by it. And at that time, we had the dishes stored in the cupboard that worked as a wall to separate the living room and the dining room. And in the seat of the living room, you could see the kitchen. Anyway, one day, I was watching TV with my mom and suddenly I got chills. I felt like turning to see at the kitchen. And then I saw a woman in a white dress walking towards my blind spot, where I was. Then at that moment, I was paralyzed with fear. Number 2, I was playing in my backyard. There was a lot of fog and I was alone. When I kicked the ball in a wrong way, it went to one of the deepest corners and far from my house at the time. When I went to go pick it up, I saw the same woman with everything, the white dress and a veil, strangely, in that corner. And at that moment, I ran away with an almost superhuman speed, and since then, I haven't seen her anymore. Number 3, it was at night, and at that time, the Momo challenge was in fashion, and I slept alone. That room was almost next to the door that led to the patio, and a window that you could see the open garage, if you can say so. And behind the room in the courtyard were some stairs to climb onto the 2nd floor. Then that night, I began to hear footsteps on the stairs that I said beforehand. I heard them going up and down without ceasing until they stopped. And after a few minutes after the steps stopped, I saw that a head appeared in the window. And luckily I had blinds, but I could tell that the head was bald, and apparently it was looking at me. At that moment, I wrapped myself in my blankets and began to pray and say the Psalm 91 from the Bible and a Hail Mary until I slept. Well, those are the 3 stories of my uncle, although he's not so big because he's still in his 1st semester of high school. But he told me these anecdotes, and I hope that either it scared you or entertained you, but they are there. Well, I will tell you about my father's story. To sum it all up, I don't know who did the witchcraft, but there are suspicions about who it was. My dad worked his business of sorts in farms. He had the same butler since he bought his first farm. If I remember, it was around 2004, 2005. Everything was going well, but then the butler was fired. And that same year, he was fired from his corporate job. He's had a lot of financial difficulties since he fired that man. The interesting thing is that after all the dismissal, my dad was diagnosed with a malignant cancerous tumor. He had several projects to get ahead which all failed. He lost his parents, his grandparents. He had serious problems with my mom. He suffered several car accidents. To sum it all up, I ended up talking to him and suggested that he move to the farm because he built a house there for the family and he was in another apartment in a project where he was losing money. And I simply told him to take care of his main farm because it was useless for him to be in another place and not be there where it could be more convenient for him. My dad moved to the farm, and while on the farm in the bottom part of the house, the pool and the surrounding area were infested with toads, and they found a lot of pests. On the farm is a house where the butler lives too, so one day they were doing something in that house and found a dummy with one foot facing forward and the other backwards. My dad's dog wouldn't go near the doll. They tried to burn the doll and it wouldn't burn until a pastor came to anoint the houses and to get the doll burned. About a month later, my father was free of cancer. We were in a better economic situation. His relationship with my mother was very nice and getting better. His personality has changed a lot for the better. The house was no longer infested with any plague or any toads. He has had many projects in which little by little he's getting ahead. And while there was a 180-degree turn with everything that was happening in his life, I don't know much about witchcraft, but after that, my belief in it has become concrete.